Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. What I want to talk about today is propagating trees. Of course, that is a very important aspect when we look at the hobby of bonsai and also indoor bonsai if you're more specifically inclined to keep your trees indoors. Propagating, of course, meaning creating new trees out of seeds, material, or your actual trees that you already have. So I want to talk, first of all, a bit theoretically about different propagation styles, later on giving you a hands-on look simply on some propagation projects I have going right now. So we can differentiate between different propagation styles. So the most fundamental and the one that probably takes the longest time, or definitely takes the longest time, is propagating from seeds. So you purchase or you just get your hands on seeds of a tree and you grow them from seeds. So you germinate those seeds and then grow the tree from there. Of course, this takes the longest time because you're basically starting at square one. So you really start from the beginning. You have to make sure your tree is having all the nutrients going all the way from the germination phase to then really growing its first little sapling into growing a tree that you can actually work on. And we really do talk about years here before you really can start working on that tree. I have already had some propagation projects with seed starting, mainly citrus tree, because you can get those seeds simply from your lemon or orange that you buy at the supermarket. However, I have moved away a bit from growing from seeds because I do see that, first of all, you don't see from the beginning how this tree will turn out, so you're very much dependent on how your seed takes. So many things can go wrong along the way there. So I by now prefer different propagation methods. One of them, for example, is water propagation. We will take a look at one water propagation project I have currently going in a second. You can already see it here then. Water propagation simply means you take cuttings from an existing tree, you put them into water and you wait until roots are developing from that branch that you cut off. And once the root mass is well developed enough, you then transfer it into soil and grow your tree from there. Which already brings me to another form of propagation, which of course then is simple soil propagation. So instead of going the route over water propagation, you simply take the cutting and you put it in soil right away, keep the soil moist, and roots hopefully will develop. You can encourage root development with using rooting hormones. You can find them normally in all well-sorted garden centers. It's normally a sort of a powder. Some I think you also can find as a liquid, but normally it's a powder. You put your cutting with the part where you cut and where you want the roots to develop into the powder, stick it in the soil, then keep the soil moist and roots should develop then. Of course, when it comes to propagation, always make sure the environment is in a setting that normally allows propagation. So meaning the temperatures should be high enough, so it shouldn't be too cold. The soil shouldn't dry out in the middle. You should change the water when you see it getting slightly murky or something like that. So just usual things you would do anyway when it comes to plant care. What you can also do when it comes to propagating is actually taking a fully grown tree and growing roots from a specific section on the tree. So you would go around, remove the bark of that part of the tree, pack it often in peat moss or soil, wrap it in plastic foil, leave it like that, make sure it keeps moist in there until from this part where you remove the bark, roots are growing, and then you basically chop that part. So you cut off that part. So you have suddenly a new tree with already root systems on it, and you have the original base tree still. So that, of course, is the fastest way normally of achieving the goal of getting a tree you can work on, because often you do this, of course, on very mature trees where you can already then work on this new tree that have you created because it already has a very thick trunk, a lot of branches that are on top of where you basically chopped it off from the original tree. However, as I said, this, of course, does take a lot of skills because the risk of damaging your tree by not doing it correctly and then not achieving the goal of getting new roots is quite high there. So that simply is something that needs to have practice. I'm definitely not at a point where I would say I can recommend doing that because I myself have not really had that much experience with that form of propagating. I usually tend to stick with propagating cuttings in forms of water propagation and soil propagation because I simply had quite good experience with that. Let's move on now to looking at some of the propagation projects I have going on currently. Here we have some water propagations. They're all from the same tree, a variegated Ficus benjamina, and my goal right now is to create roots simply by sticking them into water, making sure to change the water when it gets murky. And as you can see, we already have some roots developing on some of them. The smallest one here has not, oh no, it does. Actually, now I see it has developed some small roots down here in the back. This one also. And this one here is actually the best root system by now. As you can see, a lot of roots from many different growth points here. And I'm quite curious to see how this continues to go. I definitely should also change the water again, as you see right now. Change it normally every couple of days. They have been doing quite fine. I make sure I'm not taking too cold water when I'm changing it, and I keep it in my kitchen where the temperatures are always slightly higher than in the rest of my place, so it stays in a warm area where root growth can happen and really can accelerate there. So water propagation for me really the easiest version. One only thing you have to keep in mind is when you then move it into soil, make sure you keep the soil moist enough, because of course the roots are used to being in water, so if you keep them too dry, then suddenly this would definitely harm your tree or maybe risk you losing that cutting there altogether. But you can see, like, I had some very tall cuttings here actually, and they still have rooted. Of course, very much dependent on the species, but when it comes to ficus, basically almost every cutting that you take can root, even like as thick as a finger, they would still root. So when it comes to ficus, propagation is definitely something you should be doing anyway, because it is so easy to propagate a ficus. Speaking of ficus, I have another propagation that I have currently here, which is a Ficus benjamina. Actually, when I propagated that, it was more of a trunk separation, so it already had some roots on it, so it is almost cheating when it comes to propagation, because it simply came in a plant that had some smaller offshoot plants in there already, and I simply separated that plant, potted it up here, and since then it has been growing quite nicely and strongly in here. I can see like it really has settled in the soil already, so there must be a good root system already developing here. However, of course, it still needs a lot of growth. The trunk is as tiny as you can imagine, because it's basically just a little twig here. I let it grow for a couple more years and then really start working on it. But I do already like the potential trunk structure on it, and in general it is a variety I quite like, the very small leafed ficus. So cannot wait to start working on this in a couple of years. Another actual soil propagation that I have is this jade plant. So jade, as it is a succulent, is also very easy to propagate. You simply take a cutting, let it dry over for one day, and then you plot it in soil. Make sure you don't water it too much, and then you will have new roots developing in no time. This one, my plan is actually to keep it very small and compact, so basically creating a mame bonsai, and I think it's on a nice way already ramifying quite nicely. Just then later on I will remove the lower leaves here that are bigger and pot it a bit higher. And then I think we can achieve a quite nice look in not too long time actually. So I think it won't take too many years in this case. Probably maybe even next season I can already pot this in a small pot, starting to train it as a mame bonsai. Another more uncommon project that I have going on right now is this Chinese privet. You can say it has developed this very long, let me try to get it out here, this very long shoot all the way from the bottom here. But my plan is to let it grow a bit longer still, wait till it really starts to get woody at the lower part here, then cut it off and take it as a cutting, because it is a very strong grower. It seems to have a lot of nutrients in it. Last year I took them off and I simply threw them away, which is a bit of a pity. And this year I really want to keep this one long growth on and then move on to propagate it, because as you can see, the mother plant, like each time in cold season, is struggling. It always loses a lot of leaves, a lot of older leaves, while at the same time having lots of new growth still showing. So always a plant itself that I do struggle a little bit in winter. It always bounces back in summer and gets new foliage on it. However, I think it is good to have a backup with already a little cutting and propagating that one in the future, because you never know how long this one might fare, and maybe one winter will come where it simply is too much for the tree. So always good to have a backup, which of course also gives you simply more stuff to work on then. So there you have it, a lot of information about propagation, also giving you some input on the propagation projects I currently have going. If you have any questions regarding that propagation project, of course, feel free to leave them in the comments. Hopefully I will see you in the next video then. Until then, goodbye.